They built 12 commercial buildings on my land, tore down my fence, bulldozed my wife's memorial, and laughed in my face. But every nail they hammered was part of a trap I built for them, inside the one thing they were too arrogant to ever check. I didn't buy that land for business. I bought it for peace, for silence, for air that didn't taste like asphalt or HOA politics. It was 82 acres of rolling grass and soft pine trees, a small stream cutting through the center like a silver vein, and when the sun dropped behind the ridge, the whole valley lit up gold. It was mine, paid in full, deeded, registered. But the thing about peace is someone always wants to sell it. The first sign came with a thud, a sound that didn't belong in the quiet. I looked up from my porch, coffee in hand, and saw dust clouds over the far side of the property. Engines, trucks, concrete mixers. At first I thought it was a road crew. Then I saw the banner, a crisp white sheet flapping in the wind, printed with big, bold letters. Future site of the Lakeside Commercial Plaza, an HOA development project. I blinked. Twice. Read it again. They were on my land. No permission, no notice, no letter, nothing. The HOA had set up camp. When I drove down there, the security guard at the gate waved me off like I was a stranger. He said, "Private property, sir." I said, "Yeah, I know. It's mine." He frowned, looked down at his clipboard, then said, "You'll have to take it up with the development office." The development office was a white trailer parked in the mud. Inside, 2 men in orange vests and 1 woman in a blazer were arguing over blueprints. When I stepped in, the woman turned, adjusted her glasses, and said, "Can I help you?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "You can start by explaining why you're building on my property." She gave me a half-smile, the kind that said she thought I was bluffing. "Sir, this is HOA land. The development was approved last spring." I leaned closer. "Funny," I said, "because I've owned this parcel since 1998. She laughed softly. "Then you might want to check your paperwork. The HOA rezoned this entire section as commercial territory." That word, rezoned, hit like a hammer. Rezoning doesn't erase ownership, but she was right about one thing. I did need to check my paperwork. That night, I pulled out the safe. Inside were the old files, survey maps, tax receipts, the original deed. Everything had my name on it. Everything was clean. But then I saw something odd. A letter I'd never opened, stamped from the county office, marked "Returned to Sender." It said there was a zoning review hearing scheduled last March. The HOA had petitioned for commercial conversion. The notice was addressed to me, but the HOA had listed my address incorrectly. On paper, I was unreachable. And that's how they did it. They built a legal wall before they built a physical one. For weeks, I tried reasoning with them, emails, calls, even visits to their office, but every time I went, they acted more confident, more smug. They said things like, "Once the project's complete, we can talk compensation," or "We'll offer you first right to lease." Lease? My own land! That's when I decided I wouldn't stop them. If they wanted to build on my land, fine. I'd let them. Let them pour their millions into concrete and steel. Let them hang their banners. Let them cut their ribbons. Because when it was finished and the cameras flashed, I'd be standing there, holding the one piece of paper that would make everything stop. The deed. I spent that entire year watching from the sidelines. Construction crews moved like ants. Pylons drilled into soil that I'd walked barefoot on. Trucks rolled over the spot where I used to plant wildflowers. The sound of jackhammers replaced the call of morning birds. People thought I was crazy for not suing right away, but lawsuits take time, And this was bigger than a fence dispute. They were building 12 commercial units, a shopping center, offices, even a coffee franchise. They'd sunk too much money to back out. The deeper they built, the deeper their hole got. Months passed, and every night I'd stand by my porch, lights off, watching cranes stretch against the stars. Sometimes the workers waved, thinking I was just some curious neighbor. They had no idea the land beneath their boots was mine. By the time the final building went up, a sleek glass office with the HOA's own logo on top, the grand opening was all over the local news. Lakeside Plaza, a vision of progress. They called it a community achievement. I called it my retirement fund. On opening day, I showed up early, wearing my best suit. Walked right through the ribbon ceremony crowd like I belonged there. And I guess I did. A few board members recognized me. Their smiles faded instantly. The HOA president, a man named Calvin Reese, stepped forward. He had that politician grin, forced. Shiny teeth. "Ah, Mr. Porter," he said. "Still fighting the good fight, I see?" I nodded. "Not fighting anymore. Just attending the celebration." He smirked. "Well, glad you could make it. Maybe now you'll see what progress looks like." I reached into my jacket, pulled out the envelope. Thick, yellowed, official. I handed it to him. "This," I said, "is what ownership looks like." He blinked, opened it, read the first line. His face turned white. The cameras were still rolling. Reporters were smiling, crowd clapping, and right there, in front of everyone, Calvin froze. The deed was valid, filed, certified, undisputed. The land beneath those 12 buildings legally belonged to me. But I didn't stop there, because I knew what came next. Denial, legal threats, stall tactics. So before I ever stepped foot at that ceremony, I'd already met with my lawyer. We'd filed a property encumbrance notice across the entire parcel, meaning every tenant, every investor, every leaseholder now owed me. The HOA couldn't sell, they couldn't rent, they couldn't even insure the buildings until I was paid. I smiled at Calvin as his voice cracked through the microphone. He whispered to one of his assistants. Then to the cameras, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, a brief technical delay." But it was too late. The news drones had already zoomed in on the paper in his hand. The headline was about to change forever. And as I stood there, wind in my hair, crowd murmuring, I realized they built an empire on my soil, but they never checked who the ground belonged to. That was their first mistake, and it wouldn't be their last, because I wasn't just there to claim the land back, I was there to claim everything they built on it.
That silence after that day didn't feel like peace. It felt like pressure. The kind that builds before a storm. The kind that makes the air too heavy to breathe. By the next morning, my phone was blowing up. Reporters, lawyers, neighbors who suddenly remembered my number. The HOA had gone dark. No public statements, no interviews. But behind the scenes, they were scrabbling. And I could feel it. They weren't just trying to fight me. They were trying to erase me. The first move came fast. A courier dropped off a thick envelope. A notice of eminent domain transfer. They were claiming public benefit. Their argument that my land had become essential community infrastructure. Essential. That word echoed like a bad joke. They'd built 12 buildings without my consent, and now they wanted to call them essential? I read the letter twice, then once more just to let the absurdity sink in. It was bold, illegal, and very HOA. So I called my lawyer, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Marianne Kepler. She'd handled land disputes before, but even she was silent for a few seconds after reading the document. Then she said, "They just handed you the case of your life." We met at my kitchen table that night. Papers spread like a map of war. The deed, tax records, construction permits, satellite images from before and after. Marianne leaned back and said, "You realize, if this goes public, they're done." I nodded slowly. "That's the plan." She smiled. "Good. Then let's not stop at stopping them. Let's make them pay for every brick." Her confidence was quiet, but sharp. The kind that doesn't shout, it cuts. That night, I barely slept. Not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. Because I knew when you corner powerful people, they don't surrender. They attack. The next week, they did. They filed a defamation suit against me, claimed I was spreading false ownership claims, said I was damaging the HOA's public image. The irony almost made me laugh. But that lawsuit forced something important: discovery. Meaning they had to show me everything: emails, records, internal memos. And that's when the real story began to crack open. Inside those files were chains of messages between board members, developers, even the county surveyor. They knew the property was mine. They just buried it under paperwork. There was one email that sealed their fate. Dated March 12th, timestamped 8:46 a.m. Subject: regarding ownership irregularities. It said, "We are aware this parcel still lists under the Porter deed. County records are slow to update. Proceed with construction. It'll resolve later." That was my smoking gun. They knew. They knew from day one. Marianne looked at me across the table and said, "You realize this isn't just fraud, it's conspiracy." I nodded. "And we're going to expose every single one of them." When the first hearing date came, the courtroom was packed. News cameras lined the hallway. The HOA had hired an entire legal army, 6 attorneys in matching suits. And there I was. Just me and Marianne. But I wasn't nervous, not even a little, because the truth was heavier than all their lies combined. When the judge entered, everyone stood. He looked over his glasses and said, "Let's begin." Their lead attorney started with confidence, polished, smooth, the kind of man who probably practiced his smile in the mirror. He said, "Your Honor, our client, the HOA, has rightfully developed land zoned under public ordinance. The plaintiff's claim is based on outdated records and lacks legal standing." Marianne rose slowly. "Outdated records?" she said. Then she held up the deed. "Filed, certified, and recorded with the county assessor under my client's name, never transferred, never sold, never disputed." She walked right up to the judge's desk, set the papers down gently. The courtroom went quiet. You could hear the HVAC humming. Then she said, "And if the defense wants to claim ignorance, let's take a look at Exhibit D, an internal HOA email instructing their construction team to proceed despite knowing this deed existed." The judge's eyes narrowed. The HOA's attorney froze. The silence that followed was worth every sleepless night. That day changed everything. News outlets picked it up within hours. HOA caught building on private land. Property owner produces deed. HOA faces legal fallout. Public opinion turned fast. People were furious. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was every homeowner's nightmare made real. But the HOA wasn't done fighting. They doubled down, filed counterclaims, hired PR firms, even sent me an offer. $10 million to walk away quietly. $10 million! It was tempting, more money than I'd ever seen. But I didn't want their money. I wanted their accountability. I wanted them to feel what they made me feel. Powerless, dismissed, small. So I turned down the offer and doubled my resolve. Marianne prepared our next move, an injunction to seize all profits from the plaza until ownership was legally resolved. We filed it on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, 12 commercial tenants got notices. Their rent checks had to be redirected. To me. The HOA panicked. Investors pulled out. Banks froze funding. The plaza that had once been their crown jewel was now bleeding cash. One reporter even caught the HOA president shouting in the parking lot, screaming into his phone, "This can't be happening!" But it was. And every step they took to fix it only made things worse. A month later, during a deposition, Calvin, the president, finally snapped. He leaned forward, face red, and said, "You think you can just ruin everything we built?" I looked right at him, calm, steady, and said, "I didn't ruin it. You built it on my land." That shut him up. The court reporter paused for a second. Even she was smiling. Weeks turned into months. The case grew massive. Investigators found forged zoning papers, bribed county officials, fake signatures. It wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. It was criminal. Marianne called it the biggest HOA scandal in state history. Every time we walked into court, more people showed up to watch, and slowly the tide turned completely. Judges stopped entertaining their motions. The jury looked disgusted every time the HOA's lawyers opened their mouths. The truth had weight, and now it was crushing them. One evening, after a long hearing, I stood outside the courthouse. Sunset behind the building, news crews wrapping up, Marianne beside me, smiling. She said, "You know, if we win this, you're not just getting the land back." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She grinned. "You'll own the buildings, too." I blinked. "All 12? She nodded. "Every single one." I laughed quietly. Couldn't help it. The same people who ignored me, who trespassed, who mocked me. I was about to become their landlord. That night I walked back across the property. The plaza lights glowed against the dark. People still shopping, still walking, unaware of the war being fought beneath their feet. I stood there, listening. The faint echo of cars, the hum of neon, and somewhere in that sound, I heard justice getting closer. The fight wasn't over yet, but the ground beneath them was already shifting. Because this land...
The courtroom felt colder that morning. Not because of the air, because of what was about to happen. Every seat was filled. Cameras, spectators, reporters waiting for blood. Months of silence, months of tension. And it all came down to this: the HOA versus the man they tried to erase.
When I walked in, I didn't feel nervous. I felt calm. Too calm. Like the kind of calm that comes before thunder. Marianne leaned toward me and whispered, "Stay quiet. Let them talk first. Their arrogance will do half our job." And she was right. Across the aisle sat Calvin Reese, HOA president, now pale, wrinkled, the shine gone from his perfect suit. His lawyers looked tired too, like men who'd been running from a fire they couldn't put out. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat again. He looked over his glasses. "This is case number 44C9087, Porter versus Lakeside HOA. We are here for final arguments and judgment." The HOA attorney stood. His voice cracked just a little. "Your Honor, the HOA maintains that while procedural mistakes were made, the development serves public interest and should remain under community control." Marianne rose slowly, walked forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Your Honor," she said, "what they call procedural mistakes are crimes. They knew this land wasn't theirs. They forged records. They bribed officials. They destroyed personal property. And they built an empire on lies." She turned to the jury, then to the judge. "My client didn't ask for millions. He asked for recognition, for the right to stand on the soil his family owned for decades. And every brick of that plaza stands on stolen ground." The room was silent, the kind of silence that burns. Then she added, "They took his land. Now it's time he takes it back." The judge nodded slowly, took off his glasses, looked down at the papers in front of him, then said, "Mr. Porter, stand, please." I stood. "After reviewing the evidence, testimony, and records," he said, "this court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Full ownership of the disputed land and all commercial developments upon it are hereby transferred to Mr. Porter, effective immediately." He paused, then added, "The HOA's conduct was deliberate, deceptive, and unlawful. Restitution, damages, and legal fees are also granted." There was a gasp in the room. Reporters typing. Flashes going off. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. It was done. Calvin dropped his pen. His lawyer buried his face in his hands. For the first time since this began, I felt something heavy lift off me. Marianne smiled softly. Leaning close, she whispered, "You just became the owner of 12 commercial buildings." I whispered back, "No, I just became the owner of their arrogance." Outside the courthouse, microphones swarmed. Reporters shouting questions. "Mr. Porter, what will you do with the plaza? Will you sell it? Are you going to demolish it?" I looked straight into the cameras and said, "No demolition, no sale. But things are going to change." They didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. The next morning, I showed up at the plaza. Same suit, same calm. But this time everyone knew who I was. Tenants stood outside their stores whispering. Some nodded respectfully. Some looked nervous. And there by the fountain in the middle of the plaza stood Calvin. He looked smaller now, like the buildings had grown taller just to remind him who'd won. He said, "You can't possibly manage this. You don't know the first thing about running a commercial estate." I smiled. "Maybe not. But I know how to own one." He clenched his jaw. "Then what happens to us?" I looked around. The glass offices, the stores, the signs that all bore the HOA's logo. Then I said, "You'll get a letter. Each of you." 2 weeks later, every HOA member received the same envelope. Inside was a simple document. Notice of lease renewal, property of Porter Holdings. Rent had doubled. Their offices were no longer theirs. Every month, the men and women who built their empire on my soil now had to write checks to me. The same name they'd ignored, dismissed, mocked, now printed at the top of every contract. But revenge wasn't about money. It was about balance. So instead of tearing it all down, I turned the plaza into something new. Half the revenue went into a community fund to help homeowners fight back against abusive HOAs, to pay for legal aid, to protect families from being bullied out of their homes. Every dollar they once stole now saved someone else. That was real justice. Months passed, the plaza thrived. People started calling it Porter Square. It became a symbol of what happens when ordinary people don't back down. I'd walk through the plaza sometimes at night, hear laughter, see families, and I'd think, they tried to erase me, but all they did was carve my name into the foundation. One evening, I got a letter. A single page, no return address. It was from Calvin. It said, "You win, but at what cost?" I smiled, because he still didn't get it. I didn't win for money. I won for peace, for the land, for every person who'd ever been told they were too small to fight back. And as I stood there under the plaza lights, the night quiet again, I realized the peace I'd lost had finally returned. Not because I ran from the storm, but because I walked through it. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. It waits for the right moment to strike. And when it does, it leaves the kind of silence you can finally breathe in. So when people ask me what happened to the HOA, I tell them this. They built 12 buildings on my land. I let them finish. Then I pulled out the deed. Now, they pay rent. To me. And that's the kind of ending you don't write in fiction. You live it. If you think no HOA should ever get away with stealing someone's life like this, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because we expose them every single time.